Fire Emblem is a game series that encourages you to compare units. Most Fire Emblem games give you 30 plus characters to fill out an active roster that rarely has more than 12 to 15 spaces. As such, the player is encouraged to make decisions on who gets to join the squad. Importantly, the game doesn't really tell you how to make those decisions, you get to decide that for yourself. So you could try to pick the strongest units, or pick a bunch of units you like, or try to build a team that has one of every class. The game doesn't care. However, it is a video game, so naturally lots of people are interested in optimizing their Fire Emblem gameplay. Basically, there will always be people interested in answering the question, what are the strongest or best units I can use? And I get it, it's fun to compare units, and we can learn a lot about units when attempting to optimize playthroughs. I have made a tier list on this channel after all, and I'm working on an efficiency run of Fire Emblem 3 Book 1 right now. Optimizing for specific goals is a fun way to challenge yourself. But there's lots of ways that we can compare units. And before we get into it, a big thank you to my patrons, Danny Doyle, Acrobatic Jazz, and Helix for helping to support my content. If you want to support the content, get shoutouts, and early access to videos, you'll find a link to the Patreon in the video description. So, back to unit comparisons. In order to compare units, we have to first answer the question, what makes a unit good? What does it mean for one unit to perform better than another? Basically, what is our framework for evaluating units? This sounds like a really easy question to answer, but it's actually not, and there isn't a single correct answer. If you ask a group of people what makes a unit good, you might get dozens of different answers. Let's take a look at an example of unit evaluation. In Chapter 5X of Fire Emblem the Sacred Stones, most people will agree that Orson is by far the best unit on the map, regardless of what criteria they use for evaluating units. The reasons for this may seem obvious. Orson has insanely good stats, an extra weapon type, a horse, and more movement than Ephraim. But what do these stats and movement get us? We should only really care about stats insofar as they provide us with new strategic options or help us to achieve outcomes. Ephraim's stats are worse than Orson's, but he can still solo the map. His move is lower, but this doesn't cause him to miss any objectives. So while Orson intuitively seems better, what is it that we are valuing that makes us say he performs better than Ephraim in Chapter 5X? There are a lot of possible answers to this question. Orson can do good combat while using less valuable weapons, Orson doesn't need to use as many healing items, Orson can finish the map in less time, Orson can finish the map in less real-life time, plus any number of other little things that aren't just clearing the map reliably. If we feel Orson is better than Ephraim on this map, we must be valuing at least some of those little things, and that's what a framework for unit evaluation is trying to define. A framework determines what differences between units we care about, and ideally, how much we care about them. Frameworks define either a goal or metric that we can compare units against. I'm going to go over a few popular frameworks for unit evaluation, but before I do, I want to cover a few things about unit analysis in general. First, there is no God-given objective metric to work towards. You'll often see people describe certain frameworks as more objective ways of measuring unit performance, but this isn't really true. We can make objective assessments of units within a specific framework, but the choosing of the framework is not itself objective. For example, if we decide to evaluate unit quality on the basis of how tall each character is, we could rank them objectively within that framework, but it wouldn't make the units objectively good in a more general sense or in other contexts. All of this is to say, frameworks exist to make conversations within them more focused, and so that participants in the discussion have a common understanding of goals. But the output from the framework cannot always be generalized to other contexts. So just because a unit is good in one framework for evaluation, that doesn't necessarily make them good in other frameworks for evaluation or in a general context, and there's no objectively correct framework to choose. Ideally, we select frameworks that either align with the way that we want to play the game, or that tell us something interesting or valuable about the units being evaluated. So let's look at a few popular frameworks for evaluating units and what they tell us about those units, noting that evaluation frameworks can change a bit from game to game. One framework for evaluating units is an Iron Man. This method of evaluation assumes that we will not be resetting for unit deaths, so what makes a unit good is how much reliability they can add to a clear. This means units with really good, reliable combat, or highly mobile units that can reliably get to objectives in time are valued. There are a couple stats that are a bit more valuable in an Iron Man context than in other contexts. Namely, luck and skill are pretty important here. High luck often means you don't face crit from enemies, and in an Iron Man, even facing 1 to 3% crit can be concerning, since that's frequently a 1 to 3% chance of losing that unit forever and blowing all of the investment you put into them. It's even scarier if the unit's a game over condition. Skill also is important in Iron Man's because it ensures that your units can hit their attacks. In a lot of contexts, a 95% hit rate is pretty good, but in an Iron Man, that's a little lower than you'd like if the attack being made is really important, as you don't have the option of resetting if it doesn't work out. So those hit rates can become pretty important. Another type of unit that might become more valuable in an Iron Man context is any mid to late game replacement unit. In other contexts, units like Dazla in Fire Emblem 8 or Noah in Fire Emblem 6 can be overlooked in formats that assume characters don't die since better options are available. In an Iron Man context, though, these units can have value as replacements that require less investment. They may not be as strong as the units that came before them, but they can fill a role if you made a mistake and lost one of those other units previously. On the flip side, an Iron Man format might value a unit less if there's something unreliable about them. For example, a unit that relies on a proc skill, like Sandstorm or Ignis, might be valued less in an Iron Man. This doesn't mean the unit can't still be good, but they'll need to bring something else to the table beyond just their proc skill. So let's go back to our Ephraim versus Orson comparison in Chapter 5X. In an Iron Man, one might argue that Orson is better because there's less room for error with him. He's so durable that it's basically impossible to get him killed if you aren't trying to. Ephraim can also clear the map, but if you make a mistake, he's a lot more likely to die than Orson is, and he needs to use more of your resources in the form of healing items and Regan Leaf uses to clear the map if he sees a lot of combat. Plus, if you do make a mistake and Ephraim dies, that's the end of your run because he's a game over condition. Notably, even in an Iron Man context, some people may choose to value turns to an extent. So a list that values turns might rate Orson higher, while one concerned purely with reliability might argue that if you can clear the map 100% reliably with Ephraim, you should, since he's not an experienced black hole like Orson is and will contribute to future reliability in later maps. At its core, an analysis of units from an Iron Man perspective shows us which units can most reliably contribute over the course of a run. We might care about some other things depending on the tier list, but reliability is the key here. A different framework that often cares less about reliability is LTC or low turn count frameworks. Though it's worth noting, LTC isn't one type of playthrough, it's several. Most games have multiple popular frameworks for LTC, ranging from 0% growths to 100% growths to rigged versus non-rigged combats. The unifying trait, though, is that the metric of interest here is turns. These runs tend to be about pushing the game to its limits given a certain set of parameters, and what we learn from them is what a unit can theoretically contribute to the fastest run possible. So what makes a unit good here? It depends a bit on the format, but let's look at my favorite type of LTC, 0% growths with rigging allowed. In this context, units with high potential damage but low reliability can actually be very valuable. Let's take a look at a unit like Cormag in Fire Emblem 8. Cormag picks up the Pierce skill on promotion, which has a level % chance of proccing and allowing Cormag to ignore an enemy's defense. The skill is very powerful when it activates, but in most contexts, it's too uncommon to rely on. In a context where rigging is permitted, though, you can do things like have Cormag Pierce crit a boss 4 times with a Brave Lance. You probably wouldn't do that in most other contexts because it wouldn't be reliable enough. So 0% LTCs are often about indexing on a unit's peak potential assuming no growths, whereas a 100% LTC indexes on the peak performance of the best possible version of a unit. And what these frameworks can tell us is basically what a unit can always do in 0% growths, and what is the peak potential of a unit in 100% growths. In any of these contexts, Orson is way better than Ephraim in 5X because he helps us finish the map faster. While these formats tend to be a bit more niche since they are highly specific, one upside of them is that they make comparing units a lot easier than other formats where things are vaguer or less measurable. So if LTC is indexing highly on turn count and Iron Man's index highly on reliability, efficiency is sort of the middle ground that cares about both. Efficiency is generally defined in one of 2 ways. One is sort of a vague definition that usually goes something like, we assume fast play, no grinding, and not wasting time unnecessarily. I'm not too fond of this definition, but I don't want to make this video about that. So I'm just going to tell you how I prefer to define efficiency, and I'm going to use that for the rest of the video, but just know, there is another definition of efficiency. The definition of efficiency that I use is aiming to clear the game in the quickest, most reliable way possible. It's worth noting that with either definition you go with, efficiency is a little more vague and a little more difficult to measure than LTC or Iron Man's. If one really wants to measure it, you can use an expected turn count formula like the one on screen, and this looks kind of scary and annoying, but if you want to see it in practice, I've linked an efficiency run I'm working on in the video description. I promise it's not that scary, though it's not really beating the annoying allegations. Efficiency tells us what units can contribute to clears quickly and reliably, and this may not always be the units you expect. I think efficiency is sometimes boiled down to flyer good, horse unit good, foot units bad, but this isn't really quite right in many games. For example, in my current run of FE3 Book 1, I wasn't expecting Ogma to be a particularly important unit, mainly because he's footlocked and his damage isn't overwhelming. But it turns out that having really good skill means there are frequently situations where Ogma is the only unit that can handle part of a map with 100% reliability, which lends itself to a better expected turn count. So sometimes you send Ogma to go do something instead of a unit that's often considered much better than him because Ogma can handle it more reliably. For example, in Chapter 9, I have Ogma fight a bunch of Myrmidons instead of Minerva because Minerva can't do it at 100% accuracy. This doesn't make him better than Minerva, as Minerva still does plenty of things Ogma can't do, but it does show that Ogma has some important contributions in an efficient context. Sometimes LTC and efficiency are conflated, but I think they're more dissimilar than people think. Although efficiency does aim for low turn counts, the indexing on reliability makes efficient clears quite different from LTC clears pretty often. For example, my clear of Chapter 8 of FE3 Book 1 was 14 turns, and the 0% LTC's clear is 6 turns. However, mine actually comes in with a better expected turn count because it doesn't rely on as many unreliable attacks and crits. This doesn't mean that my clear or their clear is better, they're just indexing on different things, and the units that contribute to those things can differ. Going to our Chapter 5X example, Orson is better in an efficient context because he helps us clear the map faster than Ephraim without sacrificing reliability, since his combat is better and he moves faster, and he can even provide rescue utility to get Ephraim where he needs to go faster. Efficiency is a format that I like. It's a little vague and people disagree on how to define it, but I love a good, fast, reliable clear that can turn a frustrating, tedious map into a not frustrating, not tedious map without rigging. And efficiency formats are great for discussing what units can help you achieve that. So those are 3 of the more common frameworks for unit evaluation, but it's important to note that with any of these formats you can have additional restrictions applied to them. In an Iron Man, for example, you could still choose to value turn count to some extent by banning something like in-map grinding, defined as spending turns not advancing towards the objective in order to farm experience. Or an LTC can choose to do a full recruitment run or set a reliability threshold for their strategies, possibly sacrificing turns to recruit all the characters or increase reliability. You could even combine formats, such as the fabled Iron Man LTC run. All of these restrictions can impact your evaluation of units, and in this way, formats can even start to blend together a bit. Interestingly, there's some overlap in what is valued in all of these formats. For example, good combat at base is great in all 3. Good combat in an Iron Man means you are immediately reliable, while you may have to work around the poor reliability of weaker units at base until they grow. In LTC and efficiency, obviously being able to kill units is useful for ending maps quickly. Availability is valued in all 3 formats as it allows a unit to contribute for a larger percentage of the run, and that's great in most frameworks. If we were trying to say a unit is generically good, we might try to look at the factors that are most commonly valued across many different frameworks: reliable combat, strong utility, and good availability. This still wouldn't be objective, but at least it would hopefully apply to a large amount of players. At the end of the day, you can add any restriction that you want to your evaluation method. It's just important when discussing with others that you be clear what your method of analysis is. Basically, when you say a unit is good in Fire Emblem, you're implicitly saying they're good at something that you value. So it's good to inform people what it is that you're valuing when discussing units with them. Otherwise, how could 2 people discuss how good a unit is if one person is arguing from the perspective of an Iron Man and the other one is arguing from the perspective of an LTC? Being clear about what is being evaluated is something I aim to do better at in the future as well. I went over the 3 frameworks I see most often, but there's lots of other less popular ones too, and people should feel empowered to make their own. For example, I really enjoy draft tier lists, which is a framework that focuses on ranking how valuable it is to pick a unit early in a draft. This format really focuses on what a unit can do when used, and overlooks redundancy with other units to an extent, since you won't always have access to the best possible unit for any given role. What I'm getting at here is that there's no objective standard for what makes a unit good unless we agree on a common goal. And even then, we can only come up with objective assessments for that goal if that goal is specific and measurable. For that reason, unit evaluation is most enlightening when either we are trying to achieve a specific goal, or if we are interested in seeing what we can learn about a unit by looking at how they perform in different contexts. The least valuable part of a tier list is the tier list image itself. What's more valuable is the meaning that we can glean from the discussion around tier lists, but tier lists can be a useful tool for generating that discussion as long as people are clear about what is being valued in the discussion. Notably, I've focused a lot on tier lists in this video, but that's not the only way to evaluate units. You can totally do non-comparative analysis of units that just discusses what a unit can contribute to a run in a vacuum, and I think there's space for that as well. Currently, by far the most popular mode of evaluation in fandom spaces is efficiency, but I think there could be a lot of value in looking at units from other perspectives as well, so I'll try to be doing more of that in the future. And that's my thoughts on unit evaluation. But how do you like to evaluate units? Let me know in the comments, and if you liked the video, consider hitting the like or subscribe button so that you never miss an upload. Or join the Discord, where I post and discuss the videos and Fire Emblem in general. Either way, thanks for sticking around and have a lovely week.